another lovely day of making music. I think this next video will do really well. Maybe I can get to 6 subscribers by the end of the month. Hello.
So verdienst du, weil du mich beleidigt hast.
Pardon?
There's still going to be room for somebody to build the highest house machines. If somebody tells you that there's a rule, you get a real job.
Alright, so here's the story of this track. I mean, I did actually get shot by Hans Zimmer, was in a coma for 663 days, but at least this is the story that I like to tell myself, alright? So back in August of 2019, right before I sort of stopped working on this channel, I started working on this piece. And the reason why I chose to make something like Minecraft was because it was in the middle of the whole Minecraft revival, and I thought, hey, maybe that could get me some views on this channel. So that's what I did. And then halfway through working on it, I got shot. So this project just sat on my old computer for a solid year and a half until I finally decided that I was going to finally wake up from my coma, of course. I swear I wasn't going to actually believe that this actually happened. And I decided that I would come back to it because I actually remembered the song and being like, oh, that actually turned out pretty good. Maybe I should go back and finish it. Maybe it would be something good that we can... Perhaps it would make for a good video, is what I thought to myself. Because this song in particular, though I only had the piano done, I knew that it actually had a lot of potential in it, and I thought that, hey, maybe some of the transformations that I go from piano to orchestra will be some good things to cover in the video. So that's why we're here. Now, I'm not going to play the entire song simply because it's like a solid 4 minutes long. I'm going to upload a separate video on this channel where I just have the piano roll going through like I normally do. So for this video, I'll just be showing certain parts of it that I think are the best examples of the piano to orchestra transition. So check out, this is what we got here. This whole white area is where the piano is, and then when I hit this is the recording from the orchestra. I have a separate sound file for this, but I just wanted to be able to move around the piano stuff as easily as possible without ruining anything, so that's why it's just a recording here. So we start out with the song Wet Hands, and normally this would just be done with a piano, solo piano, but for here, I figured the best tonal percussion instrument you could have that's a little bit more interesting than a piano would be a harp. So that's simply what we have going for the first 4 bars. The velocity here with the pianos is all the same just because when I play back the piano I don't want it to sound like an absolute ear-rapey mess. But of course just keep in mind when you're going to write for a harp, of course it's going to change in velocity. Let me just show the beginning here where I show a bit of the transition and how I go for something very simple on the piano to something a little bit more complex with the orchestra. It's a pretty simple orchestral arrangement that we got going on in terms of the varying instruments. I guess the whole interesting part to this Wet Hands section is more in terms of the instrument choice and all the varying things I've done outside of the typical melody. I'll show you a bit of the structure just so we can get a bit of a start here. You got the harp doing the melody for the first measure, and for the second one, we need to add a little bit more flavor. So for that we just have some bass notes with the cellos and the basses, while the main melody kicks in with the piccolo at the very top. Now we sort of get into the area where it's just put as much detail into the piano part of it as possible, and then when you go to make the orchestral part, you take things that are within a certain range and within a certain function, you find out what works by simply just putting it into all the different instruments, and then that's essentially what you keep. The whole piano to orchestra method is a very straightforward and repetitive process, so it's a great way to just sort of get a lot of music out there. I'd say it's probably the best method to do when you're at least starting out. And then when you have actually something important to make, you're going to want to work on each individual aspect at a time, working with the whole orchestra, because by that point you're actually going to be knowing what you're doing. With this whole piano to orchestra method, it's a whole lot based on just getting as many ideas out there as possible without having to worry about if it sounds good or if it sounds bad, because of course it's not going to sound good yet because it's all on the piano. And the reason I mention that is because that is the entire logic behind these more complex parts. We have a melody at the very top, so that's going to be done by the piccolo. We have a little bit of a harmonization to that melody, so that will be played by the flutes. Another layer of harmonization, that goes to the oboes. And then another layer, that goes to the clarinets. You can see we took a similar approach when we're dealing with the string section here. The violins are doing a 3-note chord. The violas are just doing 1 note. Cellos kind of continue doing something that they were doing at the beginning, and the basses as well. This is probably the most simplest approach that you can take to get something that at least sounds a little bit good. Where things get complicated is when you start trying to include everything within it. Now I think this tends to be my biggest problem, and that is just filling up my orchestra with just way too many things going on at once. And that's what I think is sort of the biggest flaw with the whole piano to orchestra thing. Because you can't exactly hear what is coming out from what you are putting in, sometimes you may just throw way too many things in just simply out of the case of habit. So we got things like the piccolo and just doing these sort of flares right here. I'm pretty sure the French horn does something similar. And then you have everything else within the middle of it just doing the standard stuff. And that's probably why this section, even though very early on, sounds very crowded. Not because it's more of a transition than what we were previously started out as, but simply because we got way too many things going on at once. When trying to make something very emotional and very powerful, it definitely helps to be able to listen to it back with every single time you go. Part 2 is Sweden. Now this is a very chill, very laid back song. You can't really get too crazy with it, so I decided to recreate with some of that within the orchestra. If you were to listen to this on the piano, it would kind of just sound like one of those simple piano covers that are just sort of appreciated for their aesthetic, not necessarily the amount of talent that goes into playing them. Kind of like listening to an Einaudi song. But of course that I knew that with changes in what we do with the orchestra, it was going to sound good once we actually got the finished product. So we just simply got a range of instruments playing the different chords, and that's basically all that it is. We just got the string section doing these chords, violins at the top, violas, then cellos and basses. It's pretty simple. But of course with these bits, this is where you start to get to the places where pianos can't necessarily go. Look at that. Look at this absolute change in terms of the quality that we put into these modulations. We had a little bit of something going on here when it was sort of just everything going all at once. But then once we got to this where it's just the same chords going over and over again, this is the stuff that you actually gotta focus on. So since this is kind of like the second movement to our piece, of course it doesn't need to be too crazy, so therefore we took 2 whole measures in order to get up to the first change of melody. And with that, we just simply have the piccolo at the top, and we just have some things accompanying it at the bottom. The first chorus of the melody is pretty much undisturbed. A little bit of details here with the oboe and the clarinet halfway through, but aside from that, pretty much nothing. Now, space and quality of sound are really important factors to consider when you have a pretty slow song like this, because that's basically going to be all that you're hearing at this point. We got the French horns, the trumpets, and the trombones included in this whole height part. So yeah, a pretty big deal that you gotta work a little bit more on the sound design aspect for, in comparison to the other parts of the song. We got a small interlude with Minecraft, and then the final drop, the final movement, stall. Now when I first wrote this out on the piano, I was basing it off of some sort of piano rendition that somebody had already done, so I knew what it would sound like on the piano, and that it would sound fine there, but I had no idea how it would turn out once I put it all into an orchestra. So this part was really quite the experiment. And the results I found were pretty simple. Part 1 of the build-up is just bass instruments doing the rhythm. Part 2 is a solo trumpet doing the melody at the beginning. Then we have strictly strings coming in with the violins and the violas. And then finally the winds come in at this very end part. Then you got the drop where basically just everything does everything. We're of course prioritizing the brass at some of the high parts, so while this first bit remains rather empty, of course the second halves are going to be including a little bit more. It's crazy just how much atonal instruments can add to an orchestration. Here we have just a simple standard drum kit doing basic stuff, changing around the points where it shifts. We even included this marimba, I think it is, just to add a little bit of color towards the end. We got some roll cymbals at the transition parts, and that's basically all it is for the percussion. So that's how you do it. That's how you write piano and then convert it into an orchestra. Put as many ideas out there as possible, narrow it down once you realize what actually sounds bad, work a lot on the non-piano stuff, such as the dynamics changes as well as in the percussion, and dedicate instrument families to doing certain parts. And then within those instrument families, it's just layering. Now I don't know if this video is going to be shorter or longer than the other videos that I made, or maybe it's the exact same length, but hey, since you made it this far, I got a deal for you. Leave a like on the video and subscribe and you'll get your own very own John Powell. Here at the background of ABM Productions, we've been working on some cloning technology and we got a couple of prototypes running out, so if you leave a like and subscribe, you can get one of those. Now, having your own personal John Powell clone is great. He'll give you free advice on music production and scoring, and he'll tell you about the wonders of communism. It's a bit of a defect we're trying to work out right now, but trust me, it's fine. Leave a like and it will be sent to you. So that'll be it for this time. I did actually manage to get out a video this month. I know when people probably heard me saying monthly uploads in the last episode, they were probably like, that's not going to happen. Well, here we are, 30 something days later, and we got another video out. And I have plenty of plans for future videos, so be sure to stick around and I'll be catching you all in the next episode. Yeah, bye.